Beautiful. Thank you. In addition to trying to have some fun on Labor Day weekend, to spend some time with family and friends, I also try to be mindful that Labor Day is about much more than a 3-day weekend, symbolically marking the end of summer. The first Monday in September was set apart as a time to celebrate the labor movement's role in securing workers' rights. In the late 19th century, an increasing number of states were officially recognizing Labor Day as a holiday, culminating in Congress declaring Labor Day a federal holiday in 1894. And the struggles that Labor Day celebrates are far from over. Although we might wish that it were otherwise, I invite you to consider that it's important to be honest that our current economy is not designed to allow everyone to be well paid to do their dream job. That's sort of a lie that we tell people sometimes. Instead, to borrow a term from Karl Marx, the vast majority of humans earn a living through alienated labor. Work that is not personally fulfilling, but that one must do anyway to hopefully have at least a basic minimum of food and shelter. Now, there's a whole other discussion to be had. I've addressed it in various ways before for those of us who do love our work and do not feel alienated from our labor, yet need to draw boundaries for our long-term health in order to make time for our families. But I'd like to actually set aside those concerns for this morning. Because it can be easy to forget how much we as a society owe to organized labor. As one popular bumper sticker says, from the people who brought you the weekend. Because historically, many people used to spend 12 or more hours a day working for 6 or even 7-hour days a week. But in the early 19th century and continuing for over 100 years, working hours in America were gradually reduced, basically cut in half according to most accounts. The labor movement pushed back against the exploitation of workers through union organizing and other collective actions. But here's another oft-forgotten twist. In the late 19th century, extrapolating from the successes that had already happened with the labor movement, many of the best economists and public intellectuals, you can see it this widely speculated about, they regularly predicted that well before the 20th century, not the 21st century, well before the 20th century ended, a golden age of leisure would arise. We are all enjoying that golden age of leisure, right? When no one would have to work more than 2 hours a day. Long before the 4-day, what's it called, the 4-day work week or whatever, that's old news. It was supposed to be old news. Let me just read that again one more time. I really want to invite you on this Labor Day weekend to consider the implications of this. That in the late 19th century, extrapolating from the successes of the labor movement, many of the best economists regularly predicted that well before the 20th century ended, a golden age of leisure would arise in which no one would have to work more than 2 hours a day. For those forced to earn a living through alienated labor, working only 2 hours a day or for a total of 10 hours a week, or even just a little bit more than that, or a 20-hour work week is actually, about 20 hours is what most psychologists have found is about how much alienated labor you can do and not really be burned out afterward. So working 20 hours a week or less of alienated labor would mean having time to actually pursue the American dream of life, having a life, of liberty, having free time, to actually pursue happiness, instead of returning home from work too exhausted to do anything but try to rest briefly before dragging yourself back to your alienated labor the next day. Now, labor activists did help secure a 5-hour work week. a 5-day work week. That's the people who brought you the weekend. And in some industries, even a 6-hour work day. But starting with the Great Depression in the 1930s, the trend of shortening work hours reversed. A new emphasis arose on this perceived need to grow the economy through perpetually increasing consumer demand. So we find ourselves working more and more to buy more and more stuff, and then not having any free time to actually enjoy that stuff that is piling up in our yards and basements and garages, much less spend time with our family and friends. Fast forwarding to today, we're actually in the 21st century, well after the 20th century. We know that the labor rights movement has continued to lose ground on many fronts. We know that many of us work not a 10-hour work week, but a 10 or 12-hour work day, building to a 50 or 60-hour or more work week. And ironically, as our collective productivity has grown at work, has grown 72.2%. Our collective productivity has grown that much over the past 4 decades. Hourly compensation has grown 9.2%. So our productivity, 72.2%, our compensation, 9.2%. With the decline of the labor rights movement, many corporations perceive themselves as responsible not to their workers, but solely to their stockholders. And at the same time that labor rights for human beings are being rolled back, Supreme Court decisions like Citizens United have been defending the rights of corporate personhood, making the playing field even more unequal. If anyone is curious, I will readily grant that organized labor has had a sizable share. I wouldn't say its fair share, but it's had a sizable share of corruption in its history. But overall, the balance has shifted way away from workers' rights and toward corporate rights. To briefly name one vision for what we could choose to move to as a society, I invite you to hear Article 23 of the UN Declaration for Human Rights, which challenges us on 4 points. The first is that everyone has a right to work. The free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protections against unemployment. The second is that everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work. 3, everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for themselves and their family an existence worthy of human dignity and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection. And finally, everyone has the right to form and join trade unions for the protection of their interests. Now, all that being said, before you start thinking that the title of the sermon should be "Get Out Your Pitchforks," what I'm actually building to, there's nothing wrong with that, but what I'm really building to is an invitation for us on this Labor Day to just briefly consider how our mission statement here at UUCF relates to the history of the labor rights movement. As you can see on the front cover of this and every order of service, our tagline here is spirituality, community, justice. And the expanded statement is that we join together to encourage spiritual growth, build beloved community, and act for peace and justice. And in particular, beyond the obvious phrase, act for peace and justice, that middle phrase, beloved community, is an allusion to the life and work of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who helped popularize this vision of beloved community. He didn't coin it, it actually comes from a philosopher named Josiah Royce that he was inspired by. But in addition to all the ways that Dr. King talked about his dream of beloved community at its best, he also reminded audiences that the greatest hindrances, what holds us back from really authentically building beloved community, it isn't just racism alone, it is the interlocking triple threats of racism, materialism, and militarism. So on this Sunday before Labor Day, I'd like to spend just a few minutes reflecting on Dr. King's journey from civil rights alone to human rights, for the ways in which his increasing focus on both racial justice and economic justice can inform and inspire us today. And in tracing the arc of Dr. King's life, I think it's significant to remind ourselves that despite the indelible mark that he's left on our country, on our society, on the world, his public ministry actually lasted for barely more than a decade. From 1956 until his assassination in 1968 at the far too young an age of 39. When King was killed, he was a year older than I am now. Dr. King's strong commitment to economic justice was clear at the end of his life. When he was killed in Memphis, he was in town helping lead the Memphis sanitation workers strike. And later that month, he was scheduled to lead a poor people's march, a poor people's campaign to protest in Washington, D.C. But those twin themes of racial and economic justice were also there from the beginning. Consider, the name is often shortened, but the full name of that famous 1963 protest was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. If you go back and look at the archival photos and footage of that march, you'll see not only signs that say end segregated rules in public schools and we demand voting rights now, you'll also see tons of signs demanding full employment and lots of signs saying we march for jobs for all now. And in King's famous I Have a Dream speech, we often remember that part about his dream of a future where children can play together across color lines. But there was a lot more to that speech. I'll quote just one excerpt. He said, "In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note that all would be guaranteed unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is obvious today that America has defaulted on that promissory note. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation, and so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice." Or as King would later say, "What does it profit a man to eat at an integrated lunch counter if he doesn't earn enough money to buy a hamburger and a cup of coffee?" And here's a vital point. If you continue to trace the logic of how King's speeches continued to evolve, he increasingly followed a model similar to the one that Thomas Jefferson had followed centuries earlier. Jefferson did not declare our independence from the King of England based on the reasoning of British common law. He based our freedom on what he called self-evident truths, on certain unalienable rights. Likewise, more than merely seeking to get laws passed by civil government, as important as that is, King also increasingly came to see this struggle against poverty and racism as part of a worldwide human rights movement that supersedes mere laws. As the saying goes, an unjust law is no law at all. We UUs call this our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. No matter what you do, no matter who you are, it's just in there. It is your inherent worth and dignity. Part of what's also perhaps most significant to me about King's life is that his path to becoming a civil rights leader was neither obvious nor inevitable, or even predictable. And one theme I want us to explore a few different times this fall from a few different angles is how people of power and privilege come to be in authentic solidarity with oppressed groups. Specifically in the life of MLK, although the Reverend Martin Luther King Sr., his father, was born into an exploitative sharecropper system, by the time that King Jr. was born in 1929, his father was a minister in Atlanta who was doing fairly well financially. King Jr. could have chosen to follow his father's footsteps and spend his life as the minister in a fairly well-paying pulpit. As his father had before him, he'd attended and done well at the historically black Morehouse College. He went on to earn a master's divinity degree at a predominantly white seminary in 1951 before going on to earn a PhD at Boston University. So he had all the credentials to just take that pulpit and coast. But one of the ways King began to discern a call to a movement greater than himself is through his education, through this sort of consciousness raising and increasing awareness of brokenness in our society. So in 1951, that same year that he graduated seminary, he told his then girlfriend, one Coretta Scott, that he was not pro-capitalist like his father, and he had no ambitions to wealth. In his ringing turn of phrase, he said that capitalism takes necessities from the masses to give lucres to the classes. At the same time, I should be clear that King also criticized extreme socialism and collectivism. He said, now if you go too far that way, it neglects the ways that life is individual and personal. In many ways, King's maturing views can be seen as moving toward what is sometimes called the triple bottom line of people, planet, and profit. Profit motive is still in there. Profit is still real, still a major factor, but instead of seeing profit for shareholders as the only bottom line, financial gain should be balanced with people, with labor rights, and planet environmental sustainability. That triple bottom line of people and planet and profit is one vision of what a 21st century labor movement can look like. Now, there's a lot more to be said about all of this, but my hope on this Labor Day weekend has mostly been to give us a few frameworks for thinking about these issues moving forward. That as we begin to understand how much our relationship to work has actually changed over the years, that move from a 12-hour workday and a 6 to 7 day work week to an 8-hour workday and a 40-hour work week, that we can begin to see if it's changed in the past, the way it is not the way it has to be in the future. That can open up our thinking that things can continue to change for the better. Perhaps, too, like Dr. King so many years ago, maybe you are beginning to feel the inkling of a call within you to join some cause that is greater than yourself and your needs. Or maybe you're feeling a call to join or increase your commitment to building the beloved community, whatever that looks like for you here at UCF and in the larger community and world. As you continue to discern what that might look like for you individually, for us collectively, I invite you to rise and body your spirit as we sing together hymn 1018. It's in your teal hymnal, Come and Go With Me. This is what Woody Guthrie used to call a zipper song. So you may actually find that you can set down your hymnal at a certain point, that you'll notice starting in verses 2, 3, and 4, that you just zip out one word and zip in another, right? So if you remember freedom, justice, singing, that's all you need to know. Freedom, justice, singing. Let's sing together.